Num num. Birdie num num.
When I have understanding of computers, I shall be the supreme being. God isn't interested in technology. He knows nothing of the potential of the microchip or the silicon revolution. Look how he spends his time. 43 species of parrots. Nipples for men.
Don't do that, Jesus Christ! You're gonna get me killed!
Out of here!
Oh, Billy.
I have nipples, Greg. Could you milk me?
Heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it is. It just is. Especially when you arrive at the virtual Alexandria at Aeon Byte. Indeed, we still live in a world where men have nipples. There are 43 species of parrots, and Canada cannot win a Stanley Cup. But through this insanity is where we thrive in the chaos to find out our purpose and who we really are in the storm of madness that is this universe. I hope you're writing your own gospel and living your own myth. I hope you're running with those searching for the truth and avoiding those who have found it. My name is still Miguel Connor. I still have nipples, and I am your Pompatus of Gnosis. Great to see everybody who is live on this Freya day, and I hope you're doing well and enjoying. Yes, it is the summer solstice. All hail Artemis. It is the changing of the season and a great time, and I'm glad this show, which is very magical, happens on this day. And yes, very excited today to be joined by Adam Nox to discuss his book, The Cult of Two, the Uncensored Teachings of the Order of the Delirious Saints. And good book, good audio book, and good work. Adam, thank you very much for joining the show.
Miguel, thanks so much for having me. Love the intro, by the way, especially the teasing ideas there and the way you present everything. Very happy to be here. Very proud to be amongst great thinking minds.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I don't know about great thinking minds if you include me, but at least we try to have fun. At least that's it. And we try to disrupt the machine that Pink Floyd sang about. And with us too, we got the Moondog Vance. Vance, how are you doing today? And thanks for joining us.
Oh, I'm doing fine. After my mental bypass. And I did find the truth one time, but then I lost it, in a bus station somewhere. So
yeah. Oh, well, hopefully somebody picked it up and they're on their way here. Bus stations. Don't get me singing. Well, awesome. I already see people going into the chat. I hope everybody's doing okay. Good to see you, Grandpong and Howard and Ryan and everybody else. As always, if you have any questions for Adam, please super chat them so we can pull them out of the noise and address them. And as always, please support this heresy. Like, subscribe. If you're watching or listening on audio only, a nice review would really help and support this Red Pill Cafeteria in any way you can. I can't do it without you. And not much else for housekeeping, or maybe I'll get to it later, but we shall see. Next week, we got some good shows coming, good shows on July. We have a show on Gnostic television that includes the series Paradise and Silo. I'm sure we'll get to some other Gnostic television too. And then in July, great, incredible shows on the Archons and the Underworld with Ola Wolny. We'll have a show on the Knights Templar. We have definite archaeological scholarly proof that these guys were certainly sustaining this ancient Gnosis, and they were smuggling it away, and other great shows. So please stick around, because heresy shouldn't be this much fun. Well, let's get to the main event. Let's get to your superhero story, Adam. How did you become a heretic?
Some aspire to greatness. Some are born with the curse, so to speak.
Some it's just thrust upon them.
Yes, so to speak. I think for the most of it, for a very long time, I I got into spirituality at a very young age because I was born aware of my surroundings, and I was born aware of past lives and things like that. And that subsided, and I ignored that, and I try to follow the common path. But I think the more you try to follow the common path, the psychic thorn in your side continues to stimulate that need for growth, to break away from the paradigm. And that put me on a series of quests. I was fortunate enough to start very early on, being exposed to highly spiritually developed people that were able to demonstrate psychic phenomena and other physical phenomena and things like that. So it allowed me to be very open to the impossible, being able to see those kinds of experiences. And I enjoyed the journey for a little bit, and then decided to go very private for a long period of time. And in fact, with no intentions of sharing anything in the public sphere at all, because we all know how popular the subject matter is in the commercial industry. Yeah. And it was really only when a friend prompted me to show me a lot of the abuse that was going on in these fields, people misleading people kind of using a lot of these ideas without a proper understanding or interrogation of them in order to not necessarily profit, but to more spiritually bypass and then create situations where other people were in greater danger. And that is what prompted me to write the book. It's what prompted me to create the course and the work that I was on for a long time, just to really demystify, because my fundamental paradigm, and I do stress this, is my paradigm, my experience, my knowledge. Many other traditions may take similar text and interpretate them in their own way. And my obsession, however, has been not necessarily to be always historically accurate, but to be results accurate. Like, what is an interpretation that takes text material and makes it practical for me, and that I could potentially teach it to somebody else and see if they can get something similar. So my profession there, so to speak, was as a cult scientist, more than a cult spiritualist in that sense.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, and you came from a spiritualist background, right? So you were, like you said, knee deep in that, and I'm assuming you knew everybody has this potential to see beyond the veil.
Yeah, I didn't have, I had psychic experiences when I was a child, and all of that shut down completely as I went into my teens and I moved up. And I remember one day in my lost journey walking around and seeing a Christian group of youth practitioners protesting around a spiritualist center like it was Babylon. And that was the obvious indication that something interesting is going on inside, and that's where
the party is.
Stepped inside, the most loving and kind people with no judgment, no apprehension even of what was going on outside, and found again these people that had real capacity, that could demonstrate communication with spirit, awareness of somebody that they didn't have previous or conscious relationship or knowledge of. And I met my spiritual grandfather at the time, a man that came to South Africa at the age of 14, couldn't read or write, but basically built an empire on the back of spiritual communication. He could gain that knowledge directly, and he would have such intense experiences. I'd watch this man predict the events of the coming weeks to perfect accuracy, watch him create phenomena. And I trained with his grandson at the time, who was an incredibly naturally gifted medium and psychic. And try as I may, didn't get it right at first, even rebelled against the entire thing, and then realized at the peak of my kind of, so we say, chaos and destruction because of my hallucination and theories, that it's actually a lot simpler. In fact, that all of us actually are, intuitively capable. We're just brushing it off as imagination, just my own ideas. And we have such a dis-worth complex that we're not really in touch with the different parts of ourselves. And that started a powerful relationship of real self-love and self-acceptance, and really understanding that in others as well.
No, well said. Yeah, that's what I like about your book. I think at its core, it's ultimately the quest of what the ancients want, the self-knowledge, the continuing work of discovering who you are, both the delusion and the true self. Same with and your position in society. It's like you said, It's not a quick fix. You're very staunch about how this is a hard work with many rituals. Like anything, you want something in life, it's hard work, and you do it with no BS promises. You said this is where we get our hands dirty, but the payoff is it's what the mystics have always sought, right?
It is. Yeah, it definitely. There's a quote that I put out ages ago when I was still putting out things in social media platforms actively. And it's the idea that true spiritual development is not a feel-good yoga retreat. It's a war. And in the quote, I say there's a very real chance that you won't make it. And I think the more accurate thing is that you're not supposed to make it, right? Like that part of you needs to die and be transformed. And that's a violent or a difficult transformation in most cases. In fact, if it's too comfortable, we're probably ignoring something, some element of it. And that horseman of the apocalypse in our own self has to come for that transformation. It's the only way we can give up the old attachment to our model of reality that defined us so well. And again, that notion of, as you mentioned, the loss of truth, upon the path, upon the journey, is our commitment to our version of truth is sometimes that very thorn. Right, the very thing that stops our ability, and we forget, like the whole Assassin said, nothing is true, everything is permitted.
Right. Yeah, right? Very true.
But our version of truth we're committed to.
Yeah, and there was a quote you had which hit me in your book from Rumi that said, in the pain is how you stop the pain, or that's the solution for pain is in the pain. And I'm like, that's such a hard one because as we've learned, as people, past guests have said, the archons are Wetiko. They hold our damnation, but they also hold our salvation. It's and that's a hard one. It is so hard because none of us want to look into the darkness, into the abyss, right, Adam? But it's the only way.
Yes. I think also like the thing about, there's a thing that I always talk about the concept of darkness, especially when I look at the darker art aspect, right? We look at the Klipothic tree or the forbidden aspects of shadow magic. And I think a lot of, especially neophytes, they get very fascinated about, like when we talk about the abyss and they talk about the darkness and they talk about the demonic and they talk about these things. And there seems to be an overexcitation sometimes about the big drama, right? The big chaos. And that thing is necessary, right? That death, that chaos, that fundamental annihilation of the version of self that is restricted in time, space, that is based upon a history or a narrative. And because that's the building blocks of that unconscious experience of self. Right. And when that gets to crumble, it's a very awakening flush of journey from which we now have to re-articulate reality. But I think the thing that the neophyte doesn't understand all the time is sometimes the truth block is so elusively obvious. It's not even that big thing. It's that thing you almost take for granted and assume is the norm of reality. And you assume is the norm of who you are and what you're capable of and what the world is and how it works. And in many cases, again, like we speak about the archons, how there's that collective program, because you're not the only one creating reality or programming reality. But to be in the space where you recognize that you can almost be a hacker of reality, a hacker of truth, in the sense that you don't have to shift the entire paradigm, but you can find loopholes in it. Essentially, you can find ways to question the narrative so you get another edge. And those are the things that we don't always even allow ourselves, because we don't give ourselves permission necessarily to free our accepted truth or model of reality and align it to our, shall we say, more controversial truth, like the infinite potential portion of ourselves that says, well, what if? What if you're capable of greater wealth, greater joy, greater happiness, greater success? And then also, what if that's not even like the big thing? That's the entry point to something far greater, far bigger that's actually been inside of you the whole time. Mm-hmm. And in that shift of identity, that's the true shape-shifting. That's the true journey, which, I mean, it's one that I'm quite passionate about.
Yeah, I like how in your book of Always a Sync, You mentioned, because of my book Elvis, you mentioned how you use Elvis and Genghis Khan as two examples of figures who tapped into their potential, whatever you think of them, and change history. And that's something
Yes.
we all have in this field of potentiality. And magic is what can help us, like you said, make us break fate, or what we think is fate, because we're, the Jungian, we're projecting outside, we're not bringing what is within us, and also offer purpose. And that's, you would say that's the purpose of magic, or tell us more.
I think for me, when I define magic, I look at it from a couple of different lenses, because to me, I approach the subject matter exceptionally holistically, as we all should. So the same way I would say that Eastern elements and Western elements can be seen to seem as opposites or different slightly, because in one we have metal, which, in the other one we have other parts that don't line up one to one necessarily at the same level. But if I looked at the lens of them as the one is in a yin and the other one is in a yang, and I'm getting two different perspectives from a higher truth, then I do. And my same interpretation, I think, of magic as well falls in the same lens as I would look at mysticism, where magic is the manipulation of reality to a certain point. Mysticism can be more of the divination of that reality to it. And I think both of them are necessary for the creation of things. I also think we can get over biased to one. So my simplest, I'm not going to go with the classic Crowleyan interpretation of magic as, the nature of freedom or the essence of freedom, although I do think that relates. I think magic itself is a technology, and of that technology, even all language and all communication is. So my statement is that all communication is in relationship, whether locally or non-locally. And magic is the study of this communication. And the becoming conscious of what the communication is we're doing at all these levels of our being, and then learning to reinterpret that communication, shift the communication. And in shifting communication, we shift our experience of energy, and as such, our experience of consciousness. And this, to me, is the mother and father god or goddess within the psyche, at least, or within the energy matrix of the being, that then rebirths the reality, which is the son or the child. And that is a consistent alchemical initiation that is expressed in various levels as the, shall I say, the quintessential components of the psyche continues to refine itself from the three and the, should we say, the trinity of the Shin, Aleph, Mem, corresponding down into the elemental ranges of the human psyche, which then expresses itself both in the four elements, but also in the king, magician, warrior, lover archetype psychologically, as well as these various beings. And I think there comes in the freedom, right? Because magically we could say there's initiatory systems that says this is the way, right? This is the path, like it's up the tree of life, or it's through the runic systems, or it's through or whichever methodology. And oftentimes when we say the term magic or magical practice, it'll find itself in interpretation to one or other myth of that. And I think those are useful at an entry level, or like at your first kind of stage of mastery. But then we obviously have to come to the recognition that even those are assumed mythologies or maps that are still changeable. They're just the best we did at that time. And if we are quantum beings and quantum gods, if you will, then our duty is to produce original reality. And can I interpret that skill as purely magical? I don't think completely. I think magic is a technology to achieve it, but it doesn't really give us the language to fully qualify all the portions of it.
Well said indeed, sir. Yes, I would certainly agree. And on the topic, well, a little side question. Who, and some might ask this, who is the Order of the Delirious Saints?
It's just a bunch of people that like to party together.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, the Order of Delirious Saints is, again, and I think this can, I've seen a lot of occult books out there that talk about this elusive, mysterious order that has all their things. And I think a lot of it is probably great. The Delirious Saints is just a group predominantly based out of South Africa, but also with temples across the world in different areas. Not that many, who are, for the most of it, adepts of existing occult or esoteric orders. that also practice together inside of the cosmology or the system, that I share inside of the book. So it is mostly a group of people that they're not entry level. They have initiated to a fairly decent degree in some system, whether that is Masonry, Rosicrucianism, any of the other different occult orders in the world, whether it's Golden Dawn or the Dragon Rouge or any of these. And they come together in an experimental fashion under the assumption of serious stages, of which there are 3 predominant ones. The first stage, or house, if you will, is through the elemental degrees and the planetary degrees. And then there are 2 follow-ups, which is through the black side or the dark side of the tree and the front side of the tree, ultimately to realize the last one, which we would refer to as the middle way, which is an independent magical practice, which is completely based upon the cosmology of the sorcerer. And so the group of the Illyria Saints are essentially people that then take that to both an artistic and a scientific study together, to experiment together. And it's literally experiments. Like we'll throw, Curlian photography at the thing. We'll throw biofeedback during a great sex magic practice. We'll do it during deep meditations to say, are we deluding ourselves? Is there actual energy changes? Is this group hypnosis? And if group hypnosis, is it having an effect? So it is a study group of experienced practitioners for the sake of, shall we say, occult study.
No, makes sense. Reminds me of the Dadists or absurdists of Europe, but very magical, not just artistic or aesthetic. So, or today maybe chaos magicians do. Who knows? But I like it too. Yeah, because you're allowing the collective energy and the inner inspiration to take you where you need to go.
Yes. I think there's a very powerful thing, because we talk about a lot about the more the individual, should we say, individuates. There's the stages that we go through, and we ultimately come into closer to the thelemic ideal of the true will. And even when we're entering into the stage of communion with the true will, or the HGA, or what I would refer to as the unconscious or the unseen God, the God within and the hidden God, that archetypal force would have a correlation within others who have also achieved it. And there is a series of systems of divination. And that's why in the book, I look at things like polyvagal theory. I look at things like existential kink, the king warrior magician archetypes. And I'm pointing out things that we're seeing in psychology and in science and in other technologies that have always been in the occult maps. Right. And we're all kind of pursuing that fundamental truth and trying to figure out, how do I get free from my own assumptions of truth? My own assumptions of reality. And again, like I say, there's 3 stages for me, which is the cult of you, which is my website and my program, the cult of 2, which is the book, and then ultimately Coven. And Coven can be I describe Coven in a sexual context inside of the book, but it can also be a non-sexual one, in the sense of just where the practitioners have a supercharged occult, shall we say, mind mastery or mastermind group, really to try and free oneself or identify one's triggers that are limiting one's perception of experience or perception of the quantum self, and how we choose to collapse that based upon our narratives and our stories. And then in that sense, again, collectively together, work together to keep innovating, right? I mean, we're using the same hero's journey to describe the new films, like it's Harry Potter or The Matrix or anything like that. And it's not a new pattern, but the mythology shifts according to the times and cultures. And I think that's something, if a group is capable of doing that, or any people that are capable of doing that, that step away. I think the religious is an important one. We need the bhakti yoga, but then we have to get to another stage where we're almost objective about ourselves and our own triggers of how is this system or this methodology defined me, and is it really working? Is it getting me further, or is it not?
Vince, do you have a question or a super chat? And while you do that, I'm going to let the cat out speak.
Yes, I do have a super chat. Howard Ramberg wants to know about your take on the law of true names, how names give things in reality their form and identity through corresponding energies, and also if you know anything about pataphysics.
So what was that last word?
Pataphysics.
Pataphysics.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna answer the first portion of that. Thanks for the question. My view on the concept of true names. Again, we got the classic, right? The Egyptian one. If you know the true name of a person, I assume that's the interpretation or the question's position. One of the structures of the system that I work in or teach is kind of, it has 3 or 4 fundamental stages that every adept needs to go through in themselves. Like even in the first stage of the cult of you, that is the initiation phase, which is the establishment of the internal map, right? What does my dream say? How does that meet up to my own cosmology and meaning, and establishing a language between the conscious self and the unconscious self. And this then becomes the correspondence system of the sorcerer, from which they can then start to represent their internal model of reality and learn to control their emotional and psychological states, and then start to manage their behavior. The same as how we can see that the 7 planets all correspond to 7 of the major executive functions. So our ability to be able to take those things and channel it into action or into results are very deeply connected at this first stage. And then the second stage would be what I would call the magus. And the magus is really the spell crafting or the influence stage of the practice. It is, how do I use things, whether that is conversational hypnosis, neurolinguistic programming, submodalities and visuals and film editing, story-driven ideas and narratives, in order to influence the perception of another. So in the first stage, we learn to control our own perception, because perception produces, right, our reality. And in the second stage, as we become more adept and more skilled in that and more matured emotionally in that, we are now capable of becoming, I'm not saying that we're doing it for the first time, influencing somebody else's reality, but now we're becoming conscious of how we've been influencing other people's reality. And now we get to steer it more consciously. And in that context, there's certain core principles and ideals, right? So the same principles that sit on the top side of hypnosis. If I am an authority to the people that I am speaking, I automatically have hypnotic position inside of their minds, right? It's simple as that, right? I sit in the same position as the boss of the company, right? Dress the same. By unconscious association, a similar level of authority gets linked up. We see this with teachers all the time. Now, to know the true name of an individual is to intimately understand the psychic map that the other individual has, their model of reality or their story narratives through which they experience their unique and specific version of self. And if I understand the individual's specific model by which they establish their complete personal sense of self, all the other rules now become applied at supercharge, because the next rule beyond authority is rapport, or the classic spiritual oneness, right? So if I am then I can become one with the other individual, because I've established psychic rapport, because I can reflect or mirror their beliefs, their model of the world, their reality. And the moment I do that to another person, they automatically perceive me as intelligent. They automatically perceive me as good or right or beautiful or whatever. And assuming my values are aligned with that, that's the difference of rapport, how long that spell will last, that enchantment will last. So in that context, the nature of true names is, or the magic of true names is at once a very effective technology that I think is very much in use today, probably more so by professional marketers and advertising agencies than they are by 90% of the witches and sorcerers in their private little, rooms with candles. I think we got to be real about who's actually using this technology versus who's just theorizing about it. And I think if you're doing it there, it can be like all magic, a tool which is neither good nor evil. It is just technology, as all magic is. And it's really up to the maturity of the practitioner on what do they do at that next step. Because once an individual identifies you as themselves, they begin to look to you to the next stage of themselves. And this is an incredibly high level of authority. In fact, that's why I talk a lot about the stuff that I do in terms of sex magic and clarification, because if you utilize the practice of sex magic at such a deep level, without, like in our practice, the rules are you have to wear a mask, right? So we're very strict on the mask and the gray regalia and things like that inside of the practice, because if you don't, you're in a peak emotional state. You're representing your most archetypal components of your soul, and now you're projecting them on another human being. So that's taking those deep archetypal aspectal patterns of your being, projecting it into Johnny or Susan. And Johnny and Susan may like that ritual. They might be there, but they may have a drug addiction afterwards. They may have narcissistic, personality disorders that they're not discussing. And because you're not approaching ritual magic in a psychically hygienic way, now when Johnny leaves or Susie leaves and you've not properly reintegrated that component, their behavior in your brain starts to link up as the same thing. It's the god that reveals his form to the nymph and destroys her entire being. It's how psyches get crippled and human minds get, destroyed. And again, this is, I think, one of the big dangers for me out there in magic, and why a lot of my own work is hidden, not necessarily behind paywall, but behind at least levels of completion. Like, you have to complete this stage to that stage, because I don't think, because we've been hyper exposed to people talking magic and spells and things like that on TikTok and on the internet and books, and they're just always coming out. And a lot of people don't take it at that very deep level. We don't always take it as seriously. So we don't actually realize the impact of this on other human beings, because we're not really cognizantly measuring our own success, right? We're projecting too much of our insecurity in it. You think you're doing a spell or a ritual or a conversational technique to get someone attracted to you. And because they don't respond the way you've been trained to respond, you assume it doesn't work. And you either amplify it or you weaken it. But meantime, that person has a different set of social rules. Rules, for example, that says they can't act on it. That if they did, they were weaker. And now you're just making it worse. Our insecurity around our magical arts causes a lot of damage and a lot of danger. And I think that's, one of the things that I call for is that return back to qualified initiation, feedback between other practitioners that are willing to give you a respectful alternative perspective that isn't necessarily from your same trauma. And also gives you an opportunity to experience that before even trying it out on the real world. So you have a ground of initiation, a sandbox, so to speak, that you can work through those processes before you step into it.
Okay. What about the concept of manipulating others through magic? That sounds like magic can be easily used to manipulate others, convince them that you're an authority, or make them attracted to you. What are your thoughts on those particular scenarios?
So, firstly, I think magic is manipulation. There's no argument here, but I'm going to caveat that with, so is eating food, right? Because to eat food, you have to manipulate your jaw in order to do so.
Yeah.
Right. It's you have to technically manipulate your body to move. This is still an act of control. It's still an act of that. The problem that I think we're describing is not necessarily the natural act of manipulating a function, because we live in the butterfly effect, right? As a reality, it's not that magic is manipulation or influence. It's that it's impossible not to influence. There's no way that you cannot influence. The only way to not influence is to go lock yourself up in a cave. And even then, you're going to still influence the environment when your body decays at some point and starts to affect the ground, right? So the issue I think that we want to highlight is the negative manipulation versus the empowering manipulation, right? So, and I think there's the blind, and the difference there is also that has another tier to it. There's the blind and then the familiar, right? Because two young people not having a knowledge or awareness of their traumas or their weaknesses or their issues, we could say is an abusive relationship because they're acting these things out. Now, it doesn't mean either one of them is intentionally manipulative or abusive. They're just not at all conscious. They're not that developed or self-aware of why they're even doing this. They're possessed by their own archetypes and their own weaknesses. So there's the latent chaos that's in the world anyway. And if you see that happening, you have a responsibility to use your skill sets in order to bring healing, right? I mean, you can leave your kid to put his hand on the hot plate and burn it, or you can just step in as an adult and make them aware and do whatever you need to in your technology to help them understand that's a bit a wrong choice. The big problem is when somebody has the conscious awareness of these technologies and they still use it for manipulative or destructive purposes, right? In other words, purposes that doesn't serve themselves or doesn't serve their greater being and doesn't serve the other person and can ultimately be destructive. Because a little pain is sometimes good, right? Sometimes you may have to punish your kid to save him from bigger pain in the long run. A little bit of pain may be of benefit. And I think this brings us back about the requirement for initiation and why it's so important to be there. The reason is, if we look at the initiatory structures throughout the classic schools, the classic schools always had some type of elemental series of initiations, and then those would move more into the archetypal from there. Now, if we're moving more into the archetypal, why am I manipulating in the negative? Like, the reason I'm trying to manipulate somebody to sleep with me, to do whatever I want them to have a destructive behavior pattern, to get back at them, is because there's something inside of me that was broken in that event. I'm lacking something. Maybe if they do that, I'm going to feel more self-worth. If they do that, I'm going to feel more justified. I'm going to feel more respected. So this really indicates that my ego was weak and their actions triggered the feeling of not being good enough, not being capable enough, not being worth it, not being powerful. And that's the problem. So the problem is an internal illness or an aspect of the self that's in the immature, in the shadow, in the dark, that needs to be refined. And that's the purpose of initiation. If the practitioner goes through proper training, they're not just picking up this random book here or this random book there. They're getting a full proper education, right, on magic. They're doing the inner work. They're going through the transformation. They go through these stages. They will start to be aligned with their internal lover. To be aligned with the internal lover is the water element. That means to be overcoming of addictions or understanding your addictions. They'll be aligned with their inner magician or their inner air element, which means to be over the prison of the mind, the overthinking, the over-rationalizing, the disassociation, and coming into the place where strategy starts to meet action. If they've done this, they'll align with the fire element, the warrior element. To be in that space means no longer to make someone else responsible for your anger and no one else responsible for the things you are supposed to do as a being. And in that returning of the power, we see the rebirth of the king or the grounding of the earth element or the queen, the sovereign in general, which is the aspect taking back full absolute authority and power in the practitioner. This is crucial. This is so super crucial because it's overlooked. We see it in the initiatory schools. Everyone's chasing past the elementals. They want to get to the planetary and the good stuff. Give me my adaptus major. Why should I do all these other things, right? Like it's a race, but yet this is the core foundation. And if we proceed, we get into the planets. We get into the part where we see the love I'm looking for from others, the wealth I'm looking for from others, the sex, the pleasure, the self-acceptance, the respect. These are things only possible from within. The only way to get what I really want is to unlock it within. And the moment I unlock it within, the need to have it over others disappears. And this is even reflected in the technology of magic and the technology of influence and persuasion. And here's why. In order for you to magically or hypnotically persuade or influence another human being, you require to get that other human being in a type of trance. Right? So you need to get them out of the critical factor into the portion of the brain that's trance. Now, here's the catch. Your neocortex is aware of 2,000 bits of information per second. Your cerebellum, 400 billion bits of information per second. Oh. Right? So on that descent down, because trance is not a quality of the neocortex. Trance is a quality of the corpus callosum and the further regions of the brain. This already has a massively larger range of awareness than what the top one does. So once you actually bring someone in trance, you actually open up their psychic capacity. Meaning or indicating that if you are successful in a manipulative or destructive trance, you're two unhealthy people having an unhealthy expression anyway. That other person is open to some of these things. It doesn't mean they're conscious of it. Like, let's not say that person means it. They come from trauma. They come from a bad space. You come from trauma. You're playing out each other's trauma in the universe. But you are unable to do that to a human being that's actually fully developed. A being that has fully met these internal needs within themselves. That's why we say, you can't curse a powerful magician. Because there's no carrot and stick. There's no psychic element you can throw at this person that his psyche hasn't resolved already. There's that level of incongruence. All it's going to do is going to reflect back on you. I remember having a conversation with S. Connolly, ages ago, and we were speaking about the nature of curses as well. And she also pointed out so many times she's tried and it's come back on her. And again, it's because of the nature of the development. So I think that manipulation is impossible not to achieve. Your ability to actually influence, which means to influence the world in a healthy way, that other people, that you're able to build communities around you that thrive. Like Miguel Vance, like what you guys have done here, created communities that are engaging, that are connecting, is because there's a genuine deep value and interest in the people. There's a genuine deep value in your personal interest, in your personal growth. And that shines through, that transfers through. Whereas if the manipulation if there was manipulation at a lower level where it's just me, it wouldn't have that range of effect. And that's I think like a core. I think that's like a basis. Obviously we can go deeper, but I don't want to overlap just on that one idea.
Okay, thanks. That's fair answer to that question. Also, what's your definition of left-hand path versus right-hand path? Because I still, to this day, after all the education we've gotten on this channel about the left-hand path, somehow evil comes into my mind, like Anton LaVey, and like, we're going to do everything we want for ourselves and screw everybody else. And we're going to use magic to manipulate people and get what we want. And we don't care if they suffer. I mean, please disabuse me of this concept of the left-hand path.
Thanks for that one. I appreciate it. I think because it's one that I'm also like, I also like to speak about, because I've seen a lot of people that are quote unquote left-hand path, but their behavior is right-hand path. And it completely, I mean, I see it. I remember when I was very much on social media, I would see these occult forum groups, and their forums dedicated to left-hand path, to Goetia or, Leviathan or whatever else. And then there's these people that'll go, I just want to go and thank Paimon or whatever demon that did this one thing. Like, it's always a very pathetic thing. Like, this god of infinite wealth has helped them pay their rent for this month. And I'm like, I don't think you got in touch with the god in the first place, but
maybe the god of rent.
Yeah, the god of rent. Exactly. That devotional bhakti in essence is right-hand path. Right-hand path, by definition, is the devotion unto the higher self. It's the point where I'm subjugating my personality, my ego, for the sake of the higher. So hence why we predominantly associate it to Islam, Christianity, Judaism, a lot of the typical big right-hand path religions. But anytime we're doing the same type of practice, whether we're swapping Jesus out for Satan or for Paimon or for Odin, that's the exact same thing, like at its root. Left-hand path is a path of pure self-deification. It's the recognition or the redefinition of self as containing all the deity within it. And that I can use there's many models of that. Some could use these models as physical and literal. Some can use them as purely psychological. But ultimately, the power actually rests in me, and I'm the one responsible for it, not the spirit or the being on the other side. And this is, to me, why I'm what I define myself as a middle way practitioner, because I think both of them are incomplete. Because both of them contradict what we know about quantum mechanics. The more we study matter, the more it looks like mind. And that is that we're all in one thing, and there's technically, at a quantum mechanical level, no inside and outside. The problem is actually an issue of locus of control. Right? We get the idea of an external locus of control versus an internal locus of control, meaning our concept of self is either externally referenced through people, places, times, things, and events, the validation I get from others, my tradition, my group, my culture, which, let's be honest, that is important for survival. Right, we do need that in order to make rent. Maybe that's what those people should have done in same consciousness. We do need that in order to breed. We do need that to take care of our fundamental survival needs. So it is important. But the moving into an internal locus of controls means I'm not defined by it. And that's really what the essence is of Left-Hand Path, where I start to become self-deified. Gods are almost a little bit more like programs, but the frame there where I think a lot kind of gets misled is this: it's in the mind, or it's within. And what does that mean? Because that cosmology, I think, is what the occult maps are about: the tree of life, the Tao, the I Ching, the various systems, to try and articulate in some way what is the fabric of this self, this quantum self, this transcendent self, this thing that we've defined as God, and the phases or the language we use in order to establish some type of relationship with that. And that is right regardless of whatever practice you utilize. But from a core definition, if you're worshiping the devil, you're not technically a left-hand path. If you're worshiping Jesus, you're not left-hand path, you're technically right-hand path. If you are seeing self as being God and the devil and containing the demons, that doesn't mean you define self as limited to the body. But then you're in left-hand because you're saying, I am the thing that needs to be transformed. I am the lead that needs to be beaten or burned into gold to unlock through stress the mutation that is possible within my psychic lead in order to awaken to those parts. So ultimately, they do overlap if we look at the practices of them. But from a pure interpretation point of view, that's kind of what it comes down to.
Great. Thanks for that.
Yeah, well said. Vince, I have to let you get this cat again. It's driving me crazy. Can you do the other super chat? It looks like a good one.
I can.
And I'll be right back.
I will.
In a couple.
You've been hypnotized me into doing it. How important is semen retention for daily ritual? I don't practice sex magic, says Christian Simons, but have a daily alchemical and theurgic ritual practice.
So this is one of those big debates because there's two positions in the argument. So the first position in the argument makes also really good. It really depends on your interpretation of energy and your use of energy and your purpose for energy. Various magical systems across the world draw energy from different sources. Some would draw it from, if you look at vampirism would draw it from social gatherings, from energy, from places and people. And we may think like the vampire is quite bad, but they do the exact same thing as a breatharian. A breatharian just draws that same energy also from the environment, from people, from places, all kinds of things like that. The source of the energy or the quality of energy depends on what the system is going to be like. I mean, if you just eat sugar versus if you eat healthy fats, you're going to get very different results inside of your system. So there's the argument of saying semen retention is important, and many practitioners of Eastern mysticism will swear by the requirement for semen retention. But at the same time, there's the other argument that says we live in a quantum field. So either you have a model of the universe where you have a limited and finite amount of energy, and then you have the other one that says you have an infinite amount of energy. So which one do you pick? Because you can't have both as your reference. And the difference there is really what you use the energy for. So the use of sexual energy, specifically like semen, is what in the older traditions would be more seen as the odic force or the vril, and or origin energy. And origin energy has a depletion value, like there's a finite amount of it in the body and it dies. And I do believe that this has a very strong impact on you. I've been practicing this for ages. I have not yet run across, I've read infinite text that says this achievement of immortality through semen retention. I have not seen very specific benefits myself personally of semen retention over extensive period of time. There is obvious signs of destruction for over a release of semen. Right? There's obvious impacts on the nervous system. There's obvious weakening of the will, the same as porn addiction. Right? So anything like porn addiction, anything is regular release semen, any pleasure that's done in excess is going to reduce your capacity. Right? We do need pain. We do need struggle. We need to build up that energy. But my belief is that the thing that really is important there is the cultivation of the will. Right? It's the will to overcome. I mean, if we looked at, again, we spoke about left-hand path a bit, and a lot of people will look at the different demons and they go like, let's just take Lilith. And they'll see Lilith and they'll say, oh, goddess of lust and all of these things, and I should be lustful and explore all these pleasures. And that's technically not true. Like, technically, if you're doing that, that means you are the slave of Lilith. So you're not actually in the priesthood. To be in the priesthood of Lilith means that you can experience absolute lust in your body without subjugating yourself into the need. And as such, because you are free from identification, you are now able to move and flow that and actually start using it as a currency. So then it can become something for which you can build a celebrity status or a brand or whatever you want to. So semen retention, I think, is healthy within restraints, within certain kind of periods of time. Those periods of time do depend upon your age group. For older men, 40 plus, a longer range is better. Like for men, if you're in your 20s, weekly releases are probably healthier for you than overextended periods of time. The use of it from an sex magic perspective is kind of battery or energy gathering. Sexual fluids in general in the body tend to create an electromagnetic plasmic field around the working space. I think any of us that has practiced that, you've experienced it, you felt it. You may even feel in those spaces that kind of wanting to faint experience, that darkening that happens behind the veil, which is the energy kind of gathering in the astral, ready to materialize. That's a good space, but at some point it has to be released. It needs the release to bring something into birth. So if you're just doing it, again, there are many documented texts. Right? There's the practice of the Taoist practitioners. There's a lot of those things, but the benefits I've not seen to be as valid.
Yeah, sorry, Vance, but you and I might need some Viagra light cakes before we even think about these.
Hey, my age, don't talk to me about that stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
You get old enough, it's permanent semen retention.
Yeah, your Kundalini is wrapped around the TV watching a show on the couch. But yeah, that's a really great answer. And yes, your book, again, really deals with the responsibilities and risks of sex magic and all that. And I think you cover it all. I mean, you even bring up the Gnostics and their ancient tradition, the Carpocratians and other, who were just riffing off of Egyptian sex magic, which was a very normal thing in those days, and other groups there. And I like how you say sex magic is just another form of yoga. It's a union. I mean, Jung said one of the most important cornerstones of individuation is the union of the opposites. And this tradition can help with it. I mean, sex is one of the great, sex is just information, as I say. It's genetical, it's emotional, it's ancestral, it's spiritual, it's so much. But at the end of the day, it's yoga. Anything else you want to add to this so the audience knows?
I think one of the frames, because this is one of the ideas that kind of got me to start talking and writing the books again. And it was the story of a friend of mine who was talking about a tantric practitioner inside of the country that I'm in that would give women these profound tantric experiences using certain techniques. And he wasn't properly practicing this healthy hygiene. So these women would become completely obsessed with him and no longer able to engage with their lovers in a healthy way, which was the reason they came to him in the first place. And he's running on that power game. And this is, again, the example of what I would call an uninitiated person an individual that it doesn't matter if they've learned a technique, which is kind of the low magic of it, they have not done the inner work themselves in order to realize that. And this is also why I say magic and spirituality to me are two different things. Magic is a technology, and spirituality is the inner work necessary to wield that level of power responsibly and in a way that's sustainable and growing. And sex magic, I mean, our nervous system is designed to avoid pain and to attain pleasure, right? The classical get out of hell and get into heaven, of the soul, right? The psyche. And because of that, it builds up its model of self based upon the association of pleasure and pain. So those stimulations of yin and yang determines how it establishes its sense of self. And if we look at people, we're just kind of having sex, and especially like in today's world, right? We have OnlyFans models making petting zoos with 2,000 men, and it's just, it's the freak show that can't get more freaky, but yet they find a way, right? But what we're not recognizing, right? It's a use of the technology. But what's happening here is that is an example of how the associations in the brain that establish the sense of self become destructive, and they start to take away power completely from the being themselves, because they become very externalized. If you're in an unhealthy experience, well, it's like I always say the sins are good virtues when understood, right? So if we take the sin of lust, lust becomes a sin when it's like water not running, right? When water kind of stops flowing the natural current that it should, it starts to kind of gather mosquitoes. It starts to, build larvae. It becomes full of illnesses. And the same thing with the sexual impulse. So the sexual impulse, boy sees girl, says, oh, I'm going to approach the girl. Goes and approaches the girl, and now two events happen, or one specific event happens, especially in most cases, she rejects it. Now, the decision moment is where he goes, hey, maybe she didn't reject me because he doesn't have a self-worth complex, right? Maybe my approach was wrong. Maybe she was having a bad day. And he starts to refine this skill set. And because he now refines to it, he goes to the gym, he improves his approach, he now gets better and better. So sin became a virtue, right? The lust became a virtue. But now the other one, he goes back to his place and he angry masturbates, right? All women are X, people are Y, and he's having, he's masturbating. And what's happening is he's having a climax. Mm-hmm. So he's anchoring incredible pleasure in his nervous system to rejection. Mm. So he's unconscious. He's performing sex magic. He's unconsciously linking intense pleasure to an unhealthy behavior. And now he wonders after a while, why do all the women reject him and everything, and he keeps having to be going through the cycle. Meantime, he keeps re-empowering the cycle. Like, we forget that our identity is formed in the moments of us differentiating pain and pleasure and the meanings that we attach to it. And what is magic? Magic is the technology of meaning making. Right? I mean, if instead you take a sex magic technique and he went in there and he masturbated for a bit of time and he got himself, because what does the masturbatory act do? It puts you into trance. Like, it's a very quick way to get the body into a state of trance. Arousal is trance. And now in the state of arousal, he hallucinates a being that represents love, represents unity, or he represents the situation changing, rolling out differently in his head. And now he imagines himself receiving and being successful. And now he starts to link pleasure to the possibility of success. And these are unconscious things, right? This is us rewiring the unconscious. But if we're just kind of passively sitting there, and we're not recognizing that, even sex is a technology. It's why I say, we always hear about this in the different systems out there. Everyone's like heart math, right? We need to know about the heart and the impact of the heart's field. And we know that's true. And we need to know about the mind, because the mind also has an impact. If we look at the concepts of the holographic universe, and we look at this idea of Lynn McTaggart's work, The Field, where she talks about random events machines, and we see that a woman with the stronger emotional range she's able to have a far more dramatic effect. So for those that don't know, an Arya machine is a machine that's programmed to randomly spit out like zeros and ones, completely randomly, but fairly perfectly 50-50. And the experiments are designed to see who has the biggest impact on them. So when the experiment is done with women, the impact is far more dramatic, but less accurate. So, and this is also feminines in that case oftentimes come more from the heart energy. Men oftentimes come more from the controlled mind energy when they're approaching it. So a woman will oftentimes get instead of getting like 51, 45, she's getting 70, 80, 20 results, but they're in the opposite direction of what she had planned. When the masculine does it, he's not getting anything near those numbers. He's getting like from 50 to 52 versus 48, but he's getting it in the direction that he wanted. Far less potency, far more precision. And this is also a reflection of that aspect of ourselves in terms of the mind and the heart, the masculine and the feminine inside of ourselves in terms of those components. The third treasure is the serpent, the kundalini, the dragon, as it is described in some of the more kind of Nordic and left-hand path traditions in that sense. And that can only function in a healthy way when the practitioner has a healthy ego, a healthy sense of self. Their King Solomon, which can be represented as the ego overarching the Goetia of the inner self, or of the shadow self, of that portion of the unconscious, is a healthy ruler. It's a functional ruler, because that's the portion of the being that impacts, so we say, the quantum field, that impacts dark matter. And this is where we get a lot of like the unique language, of the Prince of Darkness, these powers of the magician, and all these things, which in a biblical period of time of somebody interpreting that data at that level of consciousness makes sense for that time. But now we can speak of them in what they are: quantum mechanical levels, antimatter, dark matter, because now we're getting more science and more evidence starting to show that we can impact reality at this level as a species. We're just very naive with the technology. And again, sexuality is one of those big things. It's been a precursor to a lot of our evolution. But anytime there's been a major revolution of politics, it was preceded by a revolution in the arts, preceded by a revolution in sexuality. And we've seen that time and time again.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I don't think people understand how perverted the United States was before the Revolutionary War. Boston, Massachusetts was like Babylon. You know what I mean? The energy. So yeah, you are right. And repressing it was part of the reason people got pissed off, because the redcoats were just,
oh man,
they were suppressing music and whorehouses and drinking and all that. But
before the Tea Party, it was the she parties and the he party.
Girls Gone Wild party. I don't know, but yeah. So was Manhattan. Good job. Yeah, Adam Nox was mentioned. Yeah. Well, shifting gears, and do you have a little bit more time? I don't want to, because we've done an hour.
Okay, for a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah, the shifting gears to shadow work, what we talked about before. And of course, it's important. Before the show, we were all joking about shadow working, another form of spiritual bypassing. And you're talking about, that you just don't go to ayahuasca retreat or something, and you're going to be like, I've integrated my shadow. But it's also a serious subject, because as you talked about on your podcast and so forth, trauma is real. Trauma is that wound that doesn't heal. We all have trauma, ancestral trauma. The Gnostics would say cosmic trauma that we have to work out, and it's painful and it creates a shadow. So it's important, because not only for our betterment, we're not talking about, I'm going to be a great magician. We're talking about, we just want the pain to stop so we can function better, right? So yes. Tell us how you approach shadow work and some of the insights you found about it. You yourself have talked about how you had to integrate your shadow, and you've been very honest about it.
Yeah, I think it's, again, like there's that love and life thing that everyone always tries to do when they're on social media. Everything's good, the Instagram lifestyle. And I think it's very unhealthy, because we're only seeing the good moments, right? And that makes us think our shadow part is the worst. In fact, the reason I taught the program that I taught Because when I had the conversation with a friend and I saw there was this kind of injustice or this miscommunication going, I was like, okay, cool, I'm going to put that out. But I was also going through a bit of a serious break in my life. And I think there's this hallucination that you're going to get to some place where you're perfect. And I think when that happens, that means you've just stopped growing and you found a safe space and you're just hiding in it now for a period of time. Because if there is no devil, there is no God, right? If there's no darkness, there is no light. You're not supposed to escape this. And it's also, even if we look at the core principles of influence and persuasion, a lot of spirituality says you need to go and achieve the oneness. That's great. You're supposed to. I agree. You are supposed to evolve in consciousness to the stage where you can separate the variants of self so much that they all achieve a unity in psyche. So all the parts must become one. And once you've achieved that within yourself, you have a deeper level of rapport with others or with the world that you're trying to persuade or influence. But from the position of oneness, there is no movement. There is zero movement. So this is also why like a lot of relationships fail, because they've got a lot of love, but they've got zero attraction. And that's because love is unity, but there's no attraction because there's no duality. Duality, attraction, motivation, movement thrives on duality. So it's not a case that we're supposed to achieve unity and forget duality. It's supposed that we're supposed to free ourselves from our identification with duality into union so we can transcend both and use the ones we need in an effective approach. Right? If you want to utilize attraction between your lovers, you need to activate those qualities. If you're doing sales and business with clients, you need to activate the opposites of what they have. They have a problem, you have to activate the solution. Understanding duality, using duality is an instrument of mastery. So there's no point where any of these things go away. The wheel of reincarnation becomes simpler. In the sense of it moves to the point where it stops existing because the process of time stops being seen. And that's just because you've gotten so good at the process that you already know, almost like Neo in the Matrix, this is coming next, this is coming next, and you pre-prep it, and now you develop something that keeps evolving. Now you got a system, a technology, a magical practice that works, right, for yourself. So when I was thinking about what was the core stuff that I'm going to put inside of that program, and I was going through this, again, I focused on a great goal that I had in terms of partner, lover, lifestyle, business, all that kind of stuff. And I was working through a series of initiations on the shadow side of the tree. And the force that I was working said to me, I'm going to give you everything you want, and it's going to cost you everything you are. And that's, back to that statement earlier from, true spiritual development is not a feel-good yoga retreat. It's a war. And it's not just that there's a real chance you won't make it. It's the current version of you cannot make it. Because as long as that thing is there, you cannot move through the eye of that needle. Your self, your past, your definition of this old reality, your old truth, that's standing in the way. So it was a reminder of what are those core technologies, because that's the only thing you can kind of come back to. And it's an eternal cycle. The dark path, the various paths really just gives us metaphors. They give us useful stories. And until those metaphors match our metaphors, we're going to keep getting caught in the areas, and we get caught in certain moments that we don't free ourselves from because the dramatic meaning that we attach to the event is too righteous. And that could be the meaning of no one suffers as much as I do. No one sees the pain that I have. The world's very unfair. I had to carry this alone. And we do that. We do that with pride. We walk about like it's almost like this is my pain. I'm not even going to talk about it. This is my pain, right? I'm just going to, shut up and keep it in. And the catch is, I'm not saying don't embrace suffering. I love suffering because suffering is the only way we free ourselves from a cognitive bias, right? It's only when we have enough prediction error, enough pain, are we able to free ourselves from a very set way of thinking. So growth is only possible because of pain. Binding to a new relationship or a new possible is only possible because of pleasure. So we need joy or love to unite with the new, and we need pain to separate from the old. So we should never take the assumption that pain's going to go away. We become masters of pain, right? We become masters of depression. We become masters of darkness. And this is what the mythology of the shadow tree really describes to us in many ways. The demons of violence, the demons of darkness and pain and depression. This is our ownership, right? Because what's the first Sephiroth that leads us to the abyss? It is Bina, right? So it is Saturn. Saturn is the one that leads us to the shadow side of the tree. It stands as the door as Kronos stands there. And that is when we look at Kronos. Kronos describes holding the world up, and which is our conscious reality. And it's attributed to time because our sense of self is collapsed again, people, places, times, and events, right? That's what we use as metaphors to build up this version of self. But the portions of the self, the interpretations, the meanings that fragment, that become what I refer to as the horde that dwells within us, these individual parts that are the spirits born from the meaning made in the trauma, in the event, in the experience. They run the show of the unconscious. And there's no getting to God without going through that, right? The conscious is ruled by the unconscious. And until we can clear that passageway, there's no way to the top. Everything serves the thing behind it. So it's not that we go and we banish. Even when I taught, the banishing ritual of pentagram back in the classic days of old,
Right.
There's the classic way where we're just burning away the demon in the first stage of the ritual. And I would always say to students, I'm like, instead of burning away the demon, burn away the form and let the essence remain. Because even the demonic component of yourself has a good purpose. It's come in to defend you. And if we look at this Kabbalistically, we say that the fall in the shadow side of the tree was because the first Sephiroth couldn't handle the power of the light, and it shattered. And from the shattering of that was the Klipothic tree born.
Right.
And we refer to this fallen light as the Nitsutsut. So the purpose of the black magician that goes through this path to the shadow side goes to resurrect the fallen light, which is oftentimes then represented as Lucifer or whatever mythology the practitioner kind of subscribes to. But all of our trauma, all of our pain, and a nice reference system for this comes into the model of, I like the abbreviation for it is because it's IFS. So IFS is imaginary friends, but the system is called internal family systems. And what you see in the practice of internal family systems is portions of your experience that you do not have a conscious memory of. We would refer to as implicit memory, right? Mm-hmm. So it's stuff in your childhood, stuff, they're having an impact on you. You feel in your body, you don't know what it is.
Right.
It's something that's that unconscious. Now, if I drop you into a bit of a trance, and that doesn't mean I use hypnosis, you can do it with a candle, with focus, with breathing, with going into meditation. And you get in touch with this feeling component of you, and you actually build a relationship with it. You give it a form, because form follows function. So I represent a portion of myself that I can experience through feeling only into a form. So I have a language, essentially, that I can relate to it. Now I can bring forward what was unconscious to me. Now, this now specifically speaks to traumas or pains or elements that are unconscious. They're very unconscious. They're there. They're impacting my life. I don't know why they are. This is the devil that runs your life, quote unquote. Beneath that devil is a good purpose. So what we would find in internal family systems is if I then speak to that entity, that thing that comes up, whether it's a minotaur or a dog or a fat version of you or a thin version of you or whatever, and you would ask it the question, you would ask it, how old do you think I am? The answer you would get tends to surprise you. This portion would say something like, you're 13, you're 12, you're 15, you're 20. And there's a moment where you realize as you're doing this, how you've been possessed by parts of yourself that is split through this process and this experience. And what I think the dark path really does is it maps these things at a pattern level fairly well. But most people don't see it because they get caught up in the religious component of it. And they forget that these things were an occult science. They were a technology for which we didn't have the language that we have today. So we use the language of art and the language of religion to describe these deeper corridors of the human psyche. And that's the super important thing. And the reason I think it's super, super important is because Joe Dispenza says this very nicely. If you go to one of his workshops, and again, Joe was taught by Ramtha, who was channeled through Jay-Z Knight at the time, and controversial in her own right, to say the least, as an individual. But in the school, there was a couple of good theories and a couple of good ideas that were taught, especially around the manifestation techniques that Joe, I think, kind of brought from it. And one of the things that he says that for you to materialize the new, you have to find the part that was, and you have to give it up. And it's the moment that part stops being matter and starts becoming consciousness that this massive energy releases out of the body. And that's that trapped energy. That's that nitsutsut. That's the raw energy. So you're trying to produce new experiences and new realities and new worlds, but they don't happen. You're doing the technique right. But it's not that the technique's not working. It's just that you're offering so much more resistance. And I remember the day that I really started becoming aware of this, and it was after that painful loss and that painful death. And I was sitting there with the, I'm never going to love again. I'm never going to live again. It's over. I'm dead. And I had that Gnosis divine moment where suddenly the light and everything was beautiful. And I realized that beauty I've projected in human beings because I've had the conditioned narrative that it was only possible in another human being. Instead of that love is possible just because of breath. Beauty was possible, and these were all states that were within. And I started to kind of unlock that rule system. And as I felt deeper into that energy body, and I kind of represented this resistance outside of myself, I saw these gigantic beings standing as barriers around my home. Wow. And I realized that, remember, the unconscious works in metaphor. But if we sit in a hypnosis session and I ask you to describe the shadow experiences and the pain and the darkness, you're not going to say to me, it feels like my gallbladder is inflamed. You're going to say, it feels like I am at the bottom of a cave and poison is dripping into my being. Right? It uses metaphorical language, and our experience of it is metaphorical. Hence why the deeper we go into active imagination in these works, the more mythical that reality becomes, and it becomes more real the more we disassociate from time and space, and the more we associate to imagination. And that process is incredibly profound because all minds are connected. Right? If we take two individuals, I forget the university the study was at, but they essentially had two individuals come in, quick moment, just hi, separated them into another room, closed the door. In fact, they didn't even greet. They just walked past each other. They put the one person up, just sitting back. He has measurements on his body. That's just reading EEGs, reading what's going on. The other guy in the other room, poor guy, is getting stimulated in all kinds of ways, flashes, noises, pricks, pains, all kinds of different sensations. The other guy has no awareness of this consciously. Unconsciously, though, if we read his EEG, every single stimulation happening to the other person is happening to this person in real time. Wow. Consciously, you don't know. Unconsciously, you do. Your inner God, the God of your own unconscious, that's literally physically in your cerebellum to a degree. That portion of your brain has enough neural networks or enough awareness of communication to detect what's going on in people, places, all beyond your local comprehension. And we are communicating to each other. And again, this back to that interpretation of magic. We are communicating our metaphors to each other, but our metaphors are unique to us. I may see that thing as this giant gnome or being creature, or I may experience it as I'm in that cave, and the other person just experiences a resistance. They just feel, they may want to come talk to me, but they can't because my resistance is literally creating an unconscious hypnosis to the other individual that's impacting how they can and cannot impact my life. And this is why we're resisting. We're physically pushing out. Remember, the unconscious is a biological thing. It's not. It's evolved physically over time with all of us, and we all share this as a species. We just poured its like we've called its language magic or mysticism, and its maps we've confused for ourselves. And I forget her name right off the moment. She was the author of the biofield work, the human biofield. Who did a lot of work with tuning forks, and brilliant writer. And she was talking about her creation of this biofield medicine. And she was at one point asking, now, is the biofield medicine just in her head or is it real? And all of her students were going, it's real. They're also getting this stuff. She has this map of the human biofield and where pain is and where past is and where children are and all your history. And she was working with another gentleman who was an expert in dowsing rods. And he said at one point he sat down and in his imagination, he went and created a space in the yard with an energy concentration. And the people that he was teaching this dowsing rod system to, he would say to them, go to the back and then go douse. And they would all find that energy. It wasn't real. It wasn't there, but it was there in his projection. So our maps, our unique internal systems, when we go into our shadow, this is the only time that we're actually going to find the language and the representations of our resistance to the stuff that we want. So there is no bringing in the new without purifying the old. And I think if we look at the interpretation of dark text and we kind of look away from the immature aspects that we see, a lot of those, again, the example of the right-hand path practitioner that's calling himself a left-hand path practitioner. And we get straight to the actual nitty-gritty of the details. What we really find is we just find the shadow map of the front of the tree. Instead of me fixating and saying, oh, this is my Jupiter, which is leadership and it's commerce and it's all this stuff, or this is me as, the sun, which is my healing and my community, or this is me as the moon and this aspect of myself, we go, what is the shadow representation of that? And once I can understand the shadow representation without recoiling in shame, but feeling the shame and representing that part and allowing myself to not have to be perfect, allowing myself not to have to be enlightened, to drop into the dirt of the human experience. And I forget the author's name and the choice of my language here, but he said, we are gods with anuses. And
I love it.
it's we get so caught up in that light that we're divine, we have all this stuff, and that is just because the shadow is so straight. The light, we're over attaching to what's glorious because we don't want to embrace what is not. And I think anyone that I've really encountered that is a true dark path practitioner, take away the ego titles and the Satan and all that kind of stuff, is somebody that is obsessed with unlocking their darkness and transmuting it, finding that lead into that. That's why, again, a lot of the symbolism that you see there, things like the death deities and the horsemen and all these things, these are symbolic tools by which you can devour the old self, the limited self, so that you can, like Odin, sacrifice yourself on Yggdrasil for, again, 24 runes, right? 24 hours of the day, so escape the condition of time and space to step into this new space or this space of probability. And then from there on, reform into a new experience or a new reality. And sex magic is how we do this almost all the day. Right? I mean, when you're truly in sex, you're truly present, you're not in your head, you disappear. And for most of us, we think that's kind of it. Like, it's, the orgasm was great and that was the moment. And we lose the magical potency because we're not that willing to speak to our partner. And that's evidence of how unwilling we are to speak to ourselves. And I think if we start off with speaking to the part of ourselves that is dreaming and building a relationship with that component, and through that have the courage to meet the demon within, because that's oftentimes how we see the shadow, right? It's, it's the alien, it's the monster, it's whatever thing, because we shame it. And we allow ourselves through that to experience those feelings. And we then, in our own spiritual practice, whether that's ceremonial or shamanic or meditative, doesn't matter, we then use that active imagination modality to change our relationship with this portion and find its light. Because, the old natural born killer saying, love kills the demon. Right? It's the only thing that kills the demon is love. And when we fall in love with our shadow to the point where it can fall in love with our God and vice versa, that's the resolution that I think brings about internal peace. Because, lots of people will preach this duality religion, God versus the devil, but at the same time preach unity. And there's the contradiction inside of that, because both of these are just metaphors outside of the internal reality or cosmology of the magician. And if we're able to kind of, I think, have more conversations like this, why I appreciate you having the courage, both of you, to keep coming out all the time, keep pushing, getting new people, getting new opinions, getting new voices, so people can explore this other aspect of their being. Look, I'm not there. I tried. I'm like, no, it's not for me. I'm gonna stay behind my members' walls and my initiatory processes. But it's important, right? Especially, I think, in the age that we live in today, where it's very, especially for young men and young women that are now in the next sexual crisis, right? Because that's where we are. We're seeing the next sexual crisis or transformation. The serpent's changing. We are seeing the change of arts, AI, mid-journey, image generation, video generation. We are going to see the next political revolutions, and we can already see the signs of it. We don't know what that world is yet. But, if the Aztec cultures or anything is any kind of guide and symbols, this is a journey towards that unity through the refinement of our dualities, the purification of the parts. So that's enough yapping from me on that subject.
No, that's beautiful and well said and agreed. And yeah, for the audience, we've been talking ideas and all that, but Adam's book, most of it is ritual. So who's talking in the book? Is that you, Vance?
No, I'm sorry. My mic was open.
Yeah. Okay. Let me try. The book has more rituals than any. That's most of the book. So this is a useful, actionable book that you can use to take you down that journey. Adam just doesn't doesn't write the whole thing. It's all about engaging. And yes, anything else about the book, or where you want to send individuals, Adam?
I think, thank you so much for that, Miguel. I think, copy of the book, it's on you can get the soft copy pretty much anywhere. Hard copy only available on Amazon, as well as the ebook is there. The audio book is not publicly available yet. That should be available in the next month. That's really the best entry point. And always check onto there is the blog link. I see you've got it in the video description. And there, I don't post often, but there are a couple of old lectures and old ideas, especially if you don't want to purchase something yet, you want to get more familiar with some of these other concepts. I do have some conversations with other practitioners that's on there, and I have a lot of other lectures of mine that are free to go ahead and go check out. But otherwise, check the book out. It's got QR codes and everything you can scan to get to the rest of the good stuff.
Yes, indeed. And yes, and it's been endorsed by a couple people who I love, who have been past guests many times. Marlene Seven Bremner, obviously the great Carl Abrahamson. I saw one of your old podcasts. You had one of my favorite witches, Sally Crow, who she's just amazing. So, yeah,
brilliant.
So we run with the same circles and talk to the same people. So yes, check it out. Again, I have his website in the show notes. Check out Adam's work. It will help you. But we are at the end of this journey, Vance. Thanks for keeping us company.
No, yeah. I had to tell the gang in the back that they're exploring their shadow side. So yeah, very fascinating. A lot of stuff. Very dense information, but it all sort of resonated with me. Thank you very much.
Yes,
appreciate it. Thank you for having me, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure and great to be here, and always a fan of the work. I've actually ordered a copy of your book, Miguel, this morning, so I'm looking forward to seeing that.
I look forward to your feedback. Thank you very much. Yeah. I think you'll be impressed. The king was certainly vibing with us peons agreed on a lot of things. So awesome.
It's going to be a subject interested. I have some childhood memories there that are rich and some good stories. So I'll follow up with you after a little bit of a read. I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited.
Look forward to it. And for everybody, yes, thanks for being here. If you were live, saw some great conversations in the chat. Just learned today about patametaphysics, or what do you call it? Pataphysics. I didn't know it was a precursor to the Dadists and the Surrealists, so I'll have to check it out. But yeah, always good conversations, but we are at the end. So everybody, please have a good rest of your weekend and stay awake and keep waking up. Take care, everybody.